he's got a kid's book available as well. So for those of you who have youngsters or kids that you want to give the book to, it's a fantastic book. I've actually read through cover to cover Scott's book that we're talking about tonight, and it's a phenomenal book, and really looking forward to being able to talk about it.
Thank you. I got two books. One I wrote, and one I didn't read. Hey, it's great to be here. Actually, after being in space for a year, it's great to be anywhere with gravity. When I was on the space station, I changed positions so many times, you would have thought I was running for president. So, to those of you in the audience that do not appear to be space aliens, I'd like to say good evening. To the rest of you, I come in peace. So I'm going to read a little bit from my book, just so you can hear it in my own voice, and then if we have some extra time at the end, I'll read a little Harry Potter. Some questions from both Dave and... Hey, I'm going to start at the beginning in the prologue, which is actually starts at the end of the story when I get home, 48 hours after being back on Earth, after being in space for a year, and I'm having dinner in my house in Houston with my family. This will only take about probably less than 5 minutes. I'm sitting at the head of my dining room table at home in Houston, finishing dinner with my family, my longtime girlfriend, Amiko, now my fiance over here, my daughters Samantha and Charlotte, my twin brother Mark, his wife Gabby, his daughter Claudia, our father Richie, and Amiko's son Corbin. It's a simple thing, sitting at a table and eating a meal with those you love, and many people do it every day without giving it much thought. For me, it's something I've been dreaming of for almost a year. I contemplated what it would be like to eat this meal so many times. Now that I'm finally here, it doesn't seem entirely real. The faces of the people I love that I haven't seen for so long, the chatter of many people talking together, the clink of silverware, the swish of wine in a glass, these are all unfamiliar. Even the sensation of gravity holding me in my chair feels strange. And every time I put a glass or fork down on the table, there's a part of my mind that is looking for a dot of Velcro or a strip of duct tape to hold it in place. I've been back on Earth for 48 hours. I push back from the table and struggle to stand up, feeling like an old man getting out of a recliner. Stick a fork in me. I'm done, I announce. And then I head off to bed. I slept for a few hours, and then I'll fast forward to when I get up to use the restroom a few hours later. I wasn't feeling good. I had flu-like symptoms. Felt like when you're just getting the flu. And I say I struggle to get up, find the edge of the bed, feet down, sit up, stand up. At every stage, I feel like I'm fighting through quicksand. When I'm finally vertical, the pain in my legs is awful. And on top of that pain, I feel something even more alarming. All the blood in my body is rushing to my legs, like the sensation of the blood rushing to your head when you do a headstand, but in reverse. I can feel the tissue in my legs swelling. I shuffle my way to the bathroom, moving my weight from one foot to the other with deliberate effort. Left, right, left, right. I make it to the bathroom, flip on the light, and look down at my legs. They are swollen and alien stumps, not legs at all. Any kids in here? Any kids? Put your hands over your ears. Oh shit. I say, Amiko, come look at this. And then there's about 398
So Scott, let's go from the end to the beginning. You and Mark growing up, New Jersey, got a lot of time on your hands, maybe out there taking a few risks. How important was that, becoming an astronaut?
So, my brother and I were, growing up, were a little bit of hellions, I think. having a partner in crime the same age was, in some ways an advantage, in others a disadvantage, I think. I think we pushed each other in the risk-taking category. And, unfortunately, growing up, I was never, a great student. And again, the kids, don't use me as an example. I'm going to tell you something here, and you probably shouldn't hear it. And that was, even though I became an astronaut, I started out as not the greatest student. And if I was in school today, I would be the kid looking out the window or, looking at the clock, trying to get it to run faster. Probably be, the kid with ADD or ADHD. And I, spent the first 13 years of my education kind of just meandering through school and life, and I went to college, but I actually went to the wrong college. Now, I don't mean I went to this school thinking this one was a better fit. What I mean is I actually applied to and showed up at this college thinking I was going to this one. That was the power of my ability to concentrate. And I'm at my first school and I'm like, hey, when's the football game? They're like, we don't have a football team here. That's at other college in Maryland. And then one day I walk into a bookstore, not to buy a book, the college bookstore, probably to buy gum or something. And I go in there and I see this book on a shelf, and it's got, not this book, different book. Had a red, white, and blue cover, similar to this. Looked really cool title. Made me pick it up. I started reading it. Interested enough that I took my gum money, bought the book, went back to my dorm room, laid there on my unmade dorm room bed, and read the stories of the fighter pilots that became the test pilots, that became the original Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo astronauts. The book was the right stuff. And I recognized, traits that these guys had. I felt like I had myself. I felt like I could relate to them. One big exception. I didn't know how to study, couldn't pay attention, or do my homework. But right then, I decided, right then and there, if I could fix that one problem, maybe I could be like them someday and fly into space. I know what you're thinking. That's a giant leap. 18-year-old kid decides he's going to be an astronaut. That's a giant leap. Really what it was a bunch of very small, manageable steps. And 18 years later, 18 years, and remarkably, somehow, I flew in space for the first time. And I was the first guy in my class of 35 Americans to fly in space. And, thinking back, it's just a crazy, incredible comeback story that started with a book.
So Scott, in this journey, right, you turn up at the wrong university and go into the bookstore and things. You have to learn how to learn. Can you talk about that?
One of the hardest things I have ever done is teaching myself how to pay attention, especially back then when, you didn't have any help. I was just the bad student that was looking out the window daydreaming. I was a daydreamer. And really what it was more of a medical issue, I think. ADD that is handled much different today. But it was a very, very difficult process. Very slow at first. And I somehow was able to do this all on my own. And the only way I was able to to be successful is I needed something that motivated me, something that I wanted to do so badly that forced me to pay attention and become a better student. Had a little bit of help, actually, from a surprising place, and that was my brother Mark. When after I changed schools, I was going to go down and hang out with a college friend of mine at a frat party one weekend, and my brother just happened to ask me, so, have you had a calculus test yet? Your first calculus test? I was like, no, it's the end of next week, I'll study next week. And he basically just, told me I was crazy, and because of my previous history, how I needed to be paid, he basically yelled at me. And when your twin brother yells at you about doing your homework, I was really close to just saying something I'm not going to say in front of the kids. But, I was pretty close to not listening to him. And I think that moment was probably about as pivotal as picking up the book, The Right Stuff.
What I found really compelling about it is you were able to do it, and truly it's a remarkable story in the book. So fast forward, you're in college. What was that like?
Well, I changed schools. Once I found what I wanted to do, I needed more structure, so I went to a school that had a military regiment. I felt like I needed that structure to be able to, distract me from, having too much fun and allow me time to pay attention. And I really buckled down. I went to a college that trained merchant marine officers, and we had this ship that we would sail to Europe every summer. And I think it was a really good introduction for me as a young kid, doing stuff that was very, hands-on, operationally oriented, even though it's not flying an airplane, but something that had real-life consequences, that if you messed up, people could be injured or hurt. And then 4 years later, I wound up graduating from that college, which was the State University of New York Maritime College, and I'm an ensign in the Navy, heading down to Pensacola, Florida.
So you had incredible resilience, going through all that, but one of the other things that struck me in the book is your early passion for leadership. And how important was that in the journey becoming an astronaut?
After I started reading, which started with The Right Stuff, I would actually read some other books, and I can remember at a fairly young age reading Colin Powell's book on his career and leadership and some of his principles of leadership. And I still actually remember some of those. One is that always struck me as something very important, and that's, never let your ego get so close to your opinion that when your opinion goes out the window, your ego goes with it. And I always found that a fascinating commentary on leadership. But I found throughout my career, and the more opportunity I had to be a leader of things, that leadership is very much dependent on the situation. There's different styles of leadership, and we sometimes see, people using a particular style, like like a dictator kind of style, where you're going to make all the decisions and just tell everyone what to do. And there are times when that's appropriate, like if there's a fire in space. But most other times it's really not appropriate. Teamwork and consensus building are very important, and it just really depends on the situation.
Fair enough. So you're on the journey to get into the Navy, starting flight training. Not everybody gets to fly the F-14. Not everybody gets to go to test pilot school. How did that all happen?
Well, I get to Pensacola, Florida to learn how to fly airplanes, and the first thing I'd never flown an airplane before. The first thing I realized when I get to Florida, to flight school, is I am not a particularly good pilot.
It's actually not true, but I've flown with it. It's incredible.
No, then I was not good. And then when I started flying the F-14, I wasn't good at that either. And as a matter of fact, the first time I tried to land on the ship during the daytime, qualify in the Tomcat, we have this carrier qualifications. I fly overhead the ship, and I put my landing gear, my flaps, my hook down, and it came in so low over the back of the ship that the hook of the airplane actually hit the stern. It's called the round down, and I hit the round down, and then I rolled into the first wire. When I tell the story with my brother, we do a speech together, and he blurts out often, he says, "That's crashing." It's close. But I raised the hook. I thought they were sending me to catapult again, but they sent me to the side, chained the airplane down, had me shut the engines down, open up the canopy. I get out, climb down. The instructor is standing on the side of on the deck of the ship, the guy that was grading me. And the first thing he says is, "Are you sure this career is for you?" I almost crashed during the day. The daytime's the easier part. Most people disqualify at night. I disqualified during the day and sent them home. And gave me some other options. I could potentially go and try to fly a bigger airplane like an airliner, but I wasn't sure if I could do that. I'd never done that before, like a cargo plane. Or I could try to qualify in the F-14 again. I would have to do it both in the day and at night. I wouldn't be given a third chance. And, I thought, if I'm going to fail at something, because I might fail at this, but I might as well fail at something I think I can't really achieve, just to know what my capability is, what the ceiling is for my achievement. So I gave it another try, and I worked with Rio, the guy that sits in the back of the airplane, that, he helped me a lot, and went out there the second time, and somehow was able to make a pretty big comeback. And my brother Mark says, how good you are at something when you start it is no reflection of how good you can become. And I think I'm a prime example of that.
So did you and Mark ever have the conversation, the Top Gun conversation, who's the best pilot?
Yes.
And?
He flew the H-6 in right? I flew the Tomcat, I was going to say like Tom Cruise. Tom Cruise at the time probably could have flown that airplane better than I could. And I don't mean Maverick, I mean like Tom Cruise. Oh, God.
So you're in the Navy and you go to test pilot school, you're one of the very elite group, and the moment comes to apply to be an astronaut. But Mark got his in first. How did that all work? Were you guys ever competitive about that?
Not really, but he did apply twice. But when you're a test pilot in the U.S. military, and probably the Canadian military too, when there's a selection process for pilots, most of the people apply. It's just kind of a natural thing. Mark and I didn't talk about it. I actually wasn't even going to apply because I didn't feel like I was qualified. I didn't have a master's degree at the time, even though I had some pretty good flight test experience. And then one day I'm sitting at work in my cubicle, and I shared this little cube with this other guy, and he was working on this big stack of papers. I asked him what it was. He said it was his astronaut application. I thought, oh, when is it? I said, when is it due? He said, 2 days. So I you know what? I'm gonna send something in, and it'll get rejected. But what's the harm, right? We'll figure out, how the process works. Maybe 10 years when I'm now more qualified, I might have another chance. So I sent in my application. Around the same time, my brother was also a test pilot. He had a much different career path into the military. He got his act together much younger age. But he applied at the same time, and one day he comes to me and he says, NASA called me for an interview. And I was excited for him, congratulated him. Then he asked me if he could borrow my suit, because he didn't have a suit. He knew I went to a wedding recently, and so I loaned him my suit. He goes down to NASA, he comes back a week later, gives me my suit back. And then a few weeks later, NASA calls me. I tell my brother, and the first thing I say to him is, you have to buy me a new suit. Because, how ridiculous would that look? He's showing up in the same exact clothes as my mother used to dress us alike until we figured out what she was up to. We put a stop to it. But it was actually kind of a blessing in disguise, because you go down there and the way the interview works, you kind of get to tell your story. The first thing I said when I walked in the room is, bet this looks really familiar. You've seen this suit before. So I have the only suit that's been selected to be an astronaut twice.
So class of 96, you got international astronauts in the class. In fact, Julie trained with you were ASCANs together. Of course, she's Governor General of Canada.
And Steve.
Huge honor. And Steve McLean was in the class as well. Any perspective on the role of internationals and the collaboration that came from your ASCAN training?
Interestingly enough, when I went to NASA, I'd never really been exposed that much to working with an international partnership and having, peers that were from another country. And in my class, we had 2 Canadians, 2 Japanese guys, a Spaniard, a guy from Sweden, an Italian, a German. So pretty international group, which made it, very. It was one of the great parts about it, was getting to work with people from different backgrounds and different cultures, And as I, got more experience at NASA and worked there much longer, I really came to, just really came to appreciate the value of doing this as an international partnership. The space station program being this international partnership, and I think that's what is one of the great successes of it, is that we're able to do this, as an international group. In some cases, countries that previously were, and sometimes now, are at odds with each other, particularly Russia, and how we can work together cooperatively in space despite any other issues we've had.
So you're there as an ASCAN, and a true testimony to the incredible talents is getting assigned early. You were assigned right away to Hubble, of course.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, T-2, you're lying on your back, pilot's seat, and you're getting ready to lift off. What are you thinking about?
Thinking, man, this is a really stupid thing to be doing. Getting ready to fly in space for the first time. But you're strapped in, the hatch is bolted closed, you can't escape. There's no getting away. Plus it'd be really embarrassing, right? If you're the first guy to jump out of the rocket. But the clock stops at certain points, and eventually the countdown picks up and you'll get to a minute and then 30 seconds. In 30 seconds the computers on the space shuttle take over the launch count. And then when you get to 6 seconds, the main engine's light, but you don't go anywhere because you're bolted to the launch bed by these 8 giant bolts. And the clock goes 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Those bolts are exploded open, the solid rocket motors are lit, and it feels like the hand of God has just lifted you up and is throwing you out into outer space. And if you've seen the space shuttle launch in person, or if you've been there in person, or if you've seen it on television, it looks like it's lifting off the launch pad really slowly. When you're inside of it, there is nothing slow about this. You get the feeling you're going somewhere, you're not sure where you're going, you know you're not coming back to Florida. 8.5 minutes, you're going 17,500 miles an hour, floating around in orbit around our incredible planet Earth.
So Hubble was your first mission. Your second one, STS-118, going to the space station. 2 missions on shuttle, getting ready for your long-duration flights on the station. What elements of the shuttle missions did you think got you ready the most for long duration?
What the space shuttle taught us as crew members working in the shuttle program was an incredible set of skills and discipline to operate hardware. The space shuttle had 2,000 switches and circuit breakers in it, and some of them, if you pushed a button at the wrong time or you threw a switch at the wrong time, you could blow the thing up, and you and your crewmates along with you. So I think it taught those of us that have had the privilege to fly it, has really reinforced a level of attention to detail that is critical to flying in space. And it's unfortunate now that we don't have that. Astronauts that are, becoming astronauts now and having the chance to fly in space never had that experience. I'm not saying they're going to be any less capable than we are, but it's really a great learning environment to later go on and live in space for a long period of time, and having to keep that level of attention for months and months on end.
So here we are at 118, your first mission as commander, and we find out we got damage to the tile. That was a big moment for us as a crew, and I was just wondering, years later, I want to get your perspective as a commander when you heard about that.
So Dave and I flew on STS-118. We launched in August of 2007, and it was a mission to the International Space Station. We were going to take up some cargo. We also had some new hardware in the back. We had some spare parts. Dave did a spacewalk. We did 3 total.
Three.
Okay. Yeah, we did 3 total spacewalks on that flight. And during the liftoff, we had some foam fall off the tank and hit the bottom of the space shuttle. And this was a few years after Columbia. We had lost Columbia, and they got a hole in the wing. And we had this hole, it's this big, and I know exactly how big it is because I have those tiles in my house. As soon as I landed, I called the guy that was in charge of the space shuttle. I said, I want those tiles. And he said, you're the first guy to call and ask for them, so they're yours. So I have these, but we have this hole that went right down to the aluminum of the space shuttle, right on the bottom, in a critical area. And they were worried that, you know, as we hit the atmosphere and the plasma and the 3,000 degree fireball you're in, that you know, could burn through the space shuttle. So during our mission, we were, you know, trying to do all this stuff, our mission objectives of what we were supposed to do, and then kind of in the background, mostly me having a conversation with the ground about what we're going to do about it. Are we going to try to fix it? Or are we going to fly home with the hole in the bottom of the spacecraft? And I talked to Dave and our other spacewalkers about, you know, should we risk going out and fixing it? What do you think? Do you think you could? And then I think they were fairly confident that we could probably fill it in with putty. The bigger concern is, you know, while you're doing that, does your helmet bump into the space shuttle, the bottom, which is, you can take your finger and stick it through one of those tiles. So the concern is, you know, you got this, you know, 200-pound guy in a 200-pound spacesuit, and you bump into the thing, and now you got a bigger hole than the one you were trying to fix. So they did a bunch of analysis on the ground, and in the end, they decided that we should just fly it home as is, and it would be okay. But they did there was a lot of work going on behind the scenes. And I can remember I was floating around in the space station. I had all these pictures in my pocket, and when these guys weren't busy, I'd say, hey, what do you think about this hole we got at the bottom? I was even asking the Russian guys what their opinion was, even though they didn't know anything about the space shuttle.
I enjoyed reading in the book that during re-entry at maximum heating, you were saying to yourself, okay, we must be safe now. We made it through. Down on the middeck, we were thinking the same thing. Anyway, space shuttle is a sprint. Long duration mission is a marathon. So what's your perspective on going from shuttle to your first space station mission?
It's, people use that analogy. I would say the long duration flight, though, is it's a marathon over months, but during the day, you're sprinting. You know, you're sprinting between, you know, the time you wake up and the time you go to sleep. For a while, you know, eventually, it depends on what you're doing, you can get, you know, more efficient and be able to finish your work in the time allotted. But it's a completely different experience. I'd say flying in space on the space shuttle and flying and living on the space station is similar to like baseball and football, meaning that they're both sports, but after that they really don't have anything in common with one another. That's kind of where the similarity stops, because living in space for long periods of time, I think, takes a little bit extra, maybe a different skill set, especially on the space station, where a lot of the stuff we do is not as technically complicated on the space shuttle. It's more, you know, things are more automated, but you need a different skill set, different, you know, different personalities, I think, do better on a long-term flight. We've actually had guys on the space station that have had issues living up there for long periods of time, so it is a much different experience. I actually think the long flight is much more rewarding because it's so long. You know, you have the time to appreciate it, versus a space shuttle flight, which is a much shorter experience.
Was there something from your first long duration mission that helped get you ready for the year in space?
Yeah, I think the reason why I was able to spend a year in space and not, you know, struggle with it, especially the psychological part of being confined for that long period of time, is that I had the luxury of spending almost 6 months in space. And I took like all the lessons I learned there to come up with a good plan about, you know, how I wanted to handle the situation and the stress and, you know, the level of effort it takes to sustain yourself for that long period.
So, you know, in 6 months you miss family, you miss your kids. A year is totally different. Can you comment on missing people, missing friends and family?
Yeah, that's the biggest thing about being in space for a long time for me, is missing the people on Earth. Which is interesting, because now that I'm on Earth, I miss the people I was in space with. Maybe I just miss people. But yeah, the hardest thing was missing your family, and for me, that was always the biggest concern I had. It was not my personal safety. first long flight. But what if something happens to them? Because I did experience that on my first long duration flight when my sister-in-law, Congresswoman Gabrielle Giffords, was shot in Tucson, Arizona. She was shot in the head, and 6 people killed, and I still had a couple months in front of me. And on this long flight, one of the worst moments I had was, it only lasted about 20 minutes, but I got a call from the control center, and they said, you need to call your daughter Samantha. It's an emergency. So I rushed down to my crew quarters where I have some privacy in the phone, and I go to call her, and then the comm gets cut off for 20 minutes. So I'm sitting there thinking, well, what is the emergency? Thinking about, how she was as a little kid. Eventually we get the comm back, and I get her on the phone, and I say, Samantha, are you okay? And she's like, yeah. I go, what's wrong? She says, well, I'm at Uncle Mark's house, my brother's house in Tucson. She says, Uncle Mark and Gabby have left. She said, Claudia and Claire, her 2 cousins, had went out with her friends. She was in his house by herself, and she was lonely. Wait a minute. I'm in space for a year, and you're lonely? I said there are 7.5 billion people down there. Go find one of them.
So on the longer trip, you had a chance to do 3 spacewalks. And curious, as fellow spacewalkers, what your perspective is?
Type 2 kind of fun. Type 1 kind of fun is the fun that it's fun while you're doing it, like a roller coaster. Type 2 fun is, it's fun when it's done. You get back inside and you're like, wow, that was something. We survived that. It's pretty crazy when you're out there. You're like, you're in this spacesuit. Dave's done it, and you know that there's vacuum right there, and you could get hit by a orbital debris or a micrometeoroid and put a hole in your suit, or the suit could fail. All kinds of stuff could happen to you, and there's only one person you can count on when you're outside, and that's your spacewalking buddy. And when I did these 3 spacewalks, especially the second one was especially challenging, and we realized that at some point we were close to maybe losing comm with the ground. And, it became very clear to me that it was just Chell and I. Didn't matter, all the people on the ground. They can help you, but they can't help you for real. They can try to, they can give you advice, and that's about it.
Sometimes, we joke, if something bad happens out there, you literally have the rest of your life to solve the problem. You can use that. So you're in the foot restraint. One of the most remarkable things in spacewalking is, looking at the Earth. Can you comment on that view you had?
Yeah, it's something. Looking at the Earth from space, from inside the spacecraft is just like the most beautiful thing you've ever seen. But then when you get to go outside, it's magnified. It's like an order of magnitude better. It's almost like you are looking at the planet, not even through the visor. It is just so clear and crisp and brilliant. The Earth just looks like someone took the most brilliant paint, blue paint. The Earth is mostly covered in water. I think sometimes the planet shouldn't have been called Earth, it should be called water. A lot of water out there, very blue, absolutely breathtaking. And, I really wish, everyone on Earth would get to be able to experience that someday, hopefully.
So Scott, you're a pilot's pilot, right? You're a test pilot, you've flown the space shuttle, you've been in Soyuz and things, truly remarkable. I know reading the book you don't necessarily think of yourself as a scientist, but in reality you've done more science in space than many of the scientific astronauts. So can you comment on the importance of science in the mission and how this mission turned into a remarkable study of twins and physiology and learning lessons that are going to help us go to Mars?
Yeah, so while I was on the space station for a year, we did 400 different scientific experiments. And some of them I was very involved with, and others I couldn't even tell you what they were. because, you know, they're being conducted by folks on the ground, other crew members, maybe they're outside the spacecraft. But there were some that I was involved with, mostly the medical experiments with Misha and I. The idea behind us being in space for a year is someday we want to go to Mars. There's bad stuff that happens to our bodies in space. We need to understand that better. So when we send people to Mars and it takes, 200 days to get there, they spend a year in the surface, it takes 200 days to get back, they'll be able to function and work. So part of the science I was doing was this year in space related science. A lot of medical tests, so many, drawing my blood all the time, other samples, some samples I don't even want to talk about with you guys. Did all these ultrasounds. To make the ultrasounds easier, I actually had 8 tattoos put on me before I launched as reference marks. So I wouldn't have to measure it every time. It would just save a lot of time. Little dots. Now I was told there's one on my neck. If I ever wanted to get a job at certain companies, I might have to have it removed. It's, like tattoos that you can see. I think it's one they didn't do a good job. It kind of looks like one of those prison teardrop tattoos. I have to have it removed. The other study we did was this twin study between my brother and I. NASA had a lot of data on him since 1995 when we both first interviewed. So it was a good opportunity to do a comparative study between two people that are genetically almost similar and compare us and our DNA and other things. But mostly the great part about this experiment and the twins experiment was it's NASA's first venture into genetic-based research. And they're finding some interesting stuff, actually.
Yeah, I think you're still finding great research from that mission. Fantastic results. Coming back, shuttle versus Soyuz. They tell me it's a ride of a lifetime. I've never done it, but...
Yeah. The space shuttle and the Soyuz are similar in that they both fly into space with people. That's kind of where the similarity stops. When you come home in the shuttle, like Dave and I did in 2007, it's very risky. And clearly, I lost 3 of my classmates. Dave lost 3 of yours, and 3 of his on the Columbia mission. So it's risky. But when you're sitting there and the window is several feet in front of you, so the 3,000-degree fireball is not like right next to your face, and you land on a runway. The shuttle's more like driving a Bentley down Park Avenue as compared to the Soyuz, which is much more medieval experience. You're crammed in there. It's about as small as it could possibly be. You can still fit 3 grown people in there. You're elbow to elbow. Your knees are up to your chest practically. You can't barely move. It's painful. It's almost excruciatingly painful for some people. It was for me, and my knees would hurt. You're in there for hours. Eventually, you do a deorbit burn. The shuttle's deorbit burn and the Soyuz are very similar. You fire the engine for a few minutes, and you just slow down by a few hundred miles an hour. So you go from 17,500 to maybe 17,200, and then the rest of that energy is taken out with friction with the atmosphere. But in the Soyuz, once you fire those engines, then the 3 modules are exploded apart. And there's all these explosions going on around your head. You look out the window, and there's pieces of the other sections hitting the window and flying all over the place. And eventually, you hit the atmosphere, and pretty soon you're in this 3,000-degree fireball, and you see pieces of heat shield flying by the window. You look out the window, which is right here, it's like looking into the sun, is how bright it is, until the window gets completely burnt to a crisp, burnt black. It gets hot inside. It's kind of like going over Niagara Falls in a barrel, but while you're on fire. And as soon as you realize you're not going to die, it's the most fun you've ever had in your life. If I hated spending a year in space, I'd do it all over again for the last 20 minutes.
So you're lying there in the Soyuz capsule, and I can tell you after 2 weeks when I stood up, I felt gravitationally challenged. How did you feel after a year in space?
I didn't feel great. When they pulled me out of the capsule, I had a big smile on my face. If there's maybe pictures up there, me smiling and pulling me out. It wasn't because I was feeling good. I was just trying to look better than the two guys I was with, the two Russian cosmonaut colleagues. I was actually hoping to get I was thinking I might get an Academy Award nomination for that. I understand they sometimes make mistakes. Academy Award. But yeah, I didn't feel well at first. You can walk, they carry you to a tent. You can't walk well. There's actually a video, it's going to come out on this PBS special next month, where I'm walking in the tent, and I make a comment like, because I'm stumbling around, and I say that I'm walking like Jar Jar Binks from Star Wars. But eventually, after a few hours, you're feeling a little bit better. But the recovery is definitely a progressive thing.
So you've done it all. You accomplished your dreams of flying in space, becoming an astronaut, test pilot, flown supersonic jets, traveled 25 times the speed of sound, been in space for a year. What's next?
Well, I wrote this book. Now I have to. It's funny when you write a book that there's a lot I didn't know about it. I learned a lot. It's really hard, by the way. I got a lot of respect for people that have done it. But my next challenge is just getting through tomorrow, and then I'll get through the next day. And once January rolls around, I'll start having to look for other kind of challenging things to do. But this book, and the kids' book too, it's a kids' book, came out on the same day, pretty much occupying all my time right now. But eventually I'll have to find some more challenging things to do. I'm just not sure what they are yet.
You need a backseater, call me, I'll fly with you any day. So Scott, thanks very, very much.
You can fly in the front though. You're so good at flying that T-38, I would have easily gotten in the back in a second.
That's a whole other story. But I just wanted to say, in looking beyond Earth orbit, which of course is where the space agencies of the world are thinking right now, many people in the space program have left footsteps on the path back to the moon and onwards to Mars. You've left more than footsteps. You've left a huge segment of that journey, and I just want to say thank you to you for the great work that you've done. Thanks for being an incredible commander and letting me fly in your back seat, being there for us when we go outside to do the spacewalks. It's been truly a remarkable interview, and I think at this point we'll give you a huge round of applause.
Would it just not be easier and better to send robots? Well, certainly it would be easier, I think. Definitely easier. Cheaper. And I think there is a place for robotic exploration, but there's also a place for human exploration. The Mars rovers, for instance, the science that they've done in the 20 years they've been running around on the surface of Mars, people could have done that in a few days. And, even Steve Squires, I think, will be one of the first guys who was the principal investigator for one of them, will say that we need people there at some point. And I think exploration with people and allowing, our society to grow and develop and to expand and to continue to expand is going to require people venturing further and further out into space someday. And I'm not suggesting that we can leave planet Earth, because I don't think we're ever going to find a planet better than this one. So we need to take care of this one, but there's also a place for sending people beyond low Earth orbit. And I think if we don't do that at some point, our species isn't going to survive. Because I think history has shown us you have to keep growing, expanding, venturing out, exploring, or you'll cease to exist. Yes, right here. Yep, you. Yeah.
I'm actually asking for my daughter. She's always wanted to be an astronaut, and she plans to do a degree in aerospace engineering and a master's in engineering. She's in Air Cadets, so she can get her pilot's license, and she's wondering what else you would recommend she would do to make her more competitive.
So what I always tell kids is, there's a certain fields you have to work in that are to be qualified. And they're generally STEM education. The minimum is having a degree in math, science, physics, something like that. But choose something you like. Don't become a medical doctor because Dave's up here and he was a medical doctor. Don't become a pilot because I'm up here and I'm a pilot and you think, hey, that's what those guys did. I need to do that. Choose something you like, but that is qualifying, because if it's something you like, you're going to do better at it. And NASA wants people that have done well in their jobs, but they also want those people to have other skills. And the other skills are like where you're talking about flying an airplane, being an air cadet, doing things that require to use your hands and, fix things. I was on the selection board, and I always liked the person that came in and had a great science background, but also was like an electrician because they worked in their parents' electrical business, so they got certified to do that. Those type of things. Demonstrating that you can work well as part of a team. Leadership. Those kind of skills. You could be the best scientist in the world, the best pilot in the world, and the Canadian Space Agency and NASA, they're not going to want you unless you can do some other stuff well. Because, on the space station, you're not only the scientist, you're the engineer, you might be the pilot of the spacecraft or the flight engineer, you're the plumber, you're the electrician, you're the IT person, you're the janitor, you're the doctor, you're the dentist, you got to do everything.
We've got a question up here.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you so much for coming. It was a great presentation. You mentioned that one of the most difficult things was coping with not being with your family and your friends. I wanted to ask what you did in space to help you cope with that.
Well, we have good methods of communication. We have a phone that works most of the time when you have a satellite link. We have email, and we have the ability to have a video conference. And those things are great. We would have the video conferences on the weekends. I tell you what, I think what helped me the most in coping was the fact that I had the ability to work on a project with my partner, fiance, Miko, that was important to both of us, and that was engaging the public in with social media and Instagram. And that gave us something to work on together, rather than just talk about, hey, how was your day? How was your day? Doing that every day for a year. It was a project that was important to us, which helped a lot. Before I flew, President Obama invited me to the State of Union address, and he challenged me to Instagram the experience, and I took him seriously because he's the president. And I like him. And so I tried to engage the public in more of a conversation. I would do like these tweet chats occasionally, and one day on the weekend when I had some spare time, I'm just going to tell you the story. It's not answering your question, but just going to do this tweet chat, and I get a question from President Obama, and he says, types it, I don't know if it was him typing, I couldn't remember. He says, hey Scott, you ever look out the window and just freak out? I said, no, Mr. President, I don't freak out about anything except, getting a question from you. Within a few seconds, Buzz Aldrin jumps into the conversation and says, Mr. President, he's only in low Earth orbit. I went all the way to the moon. Okay, Buzz, everyone knows that. So I got trolled while I was in space by the second man on the moon. Great at that.
Now that you're back on Earth, what is it about space that you miss the most? Is it the food or Game of Thrones? Or do you miss something else?
Neither of those. My good friend and colleague, Gennady Padalka, Russian cosmonaut, says when we are in space, we miss Earth, and when we're on Earth, we miss space. And what I miss about space is the work, work that is technically incredibly challenging, exacting. In some cases, if you make a mistake, you could die. And for some reason that that kind of thing for some crazy reason is always, is what, this kind of stuff I wanted to do. I don't know why. Maybe I was just born that way. But then you also miss the people that you're up there with. And, all great friends. When you have this shared experience this shared incredible experience, it just brings people closer together. And then when you come back to Earth, you don't really see them much anymore because we all have our own lives. So, one thing I miss about being in space is the people, which is one thing I missed when I was in space, which was the people that I cared about on Earth.
We have a question from this little gentleman up here.
And if you sign books, where do you sign the books?
Can you say that one more time?
If you sign the books, where do you sign the books?
I think he would like to know where you would be
Oh,
signing
where are we
books.
signing the
If you're
books
signing
later?
books, yes.
I don't know.
We'll figure that out for
In
you.
this building somewhere, I'm sure you'll be able
I
to.
think Anil has another yard.
How did you fly the spaceship?
How did I fly it? Not too well. No, I did okay. My landing was okay.
Okay, we have a question over here.
Yeah.
Hi. You mentioned that you felt like you could relate to the guys from the book The Right Stuff because you felt like you had the same qualities as them. What personality quality do you think benefited you the most for long-term space travel?
I think, being able to deal with being isolated and not getting to me. I'm not the type of person that would get lonely, and I've seen that in people in space where they feel like they've lost some kind of emotional attachment to the people on Earth, and it makes them not feel the greatest. I think my training as a space shuttle astronaut clearly helped in that, knowing, when and where you need to be very, very precise in what you're doing. I think in some cases, though, also having some ADD was helpful. And I'll tell you why. And that is, I've been in space with a lot of people, 40 different people. And a lot of these people are very, very accomplished, very talented, but some of them have to do everything perfectly. And you can't do that for an entire year. And I think for me, it was easier. For some reason, I was always able to figure out what the important thing was and focus a lot of attention on that and easily ignore everything else. And I've been in space with people that did not have that ability to ignore the stuff that was not as important, and it would just eat their lunch. I mean, they would, just wear themselves out. So, in some ways, sometimes your weaknesses, you think it's a weakness, but it can work to your advantage.
I did.
My question is, you know that in the Earth is circular change. How come you can do? How you can sleep in the morning or night or day cycle change?
Yeah, so we don't have, the normal sunrises and sunsets because we're going so fast. So, every 90 minutes you're flying around the Earth. So, 45 minutes there's a sunrise and 45 minutes later the sun sets. So your circadian rhythm is not based on the sun. It's based on your watch. So we would, operate on Greenwich time, and we would get up at 6 in the morning and go to sleep around 11 o'clock at night. And it's not the greatest thing. I think it affects your sleep, not having sunlight during the day and darkness at night, but we're able to adjust.
We've got a question down here at the front.
What are some of the main medical challenges you face up in space, or when you come back here and you need to adapt once again to gravity?
I always thought it was harder coming back from a long flight. Some people get sick in space and they have the space sickness and they throw up, and it's not much fun. I've never thrown up in space. I've never thrown up in space because of space sickness. I actually threw up on a treadmill one time. I'm not sure why. Just randomly, 6 months into a flight, I'm running and just threw up. But coming back is hard.
Probably the beer. Probably the beer.
Yeah, we don't have any beer. If we did, though, it'd be an IPA. Those Canadian ones.
Hi, we have a question. So let's say you're 7 months into the 12 months, and for whatever reason, it's not an emergency. Maybe there's a medical issue, but you can't do the rest of the 12 months. Is the view tough? You're there for 12 months, or is there a backup? Is there a way to get you back?
Well, we have a Soyuz that we could come back in an emergency if there was a fire or depressurization. But if something happened on the ground, I mean, there's no Uber. You're not calling an Uber. Maybe someday. But Uber Space would be the name of it. But yeah, you're not coming home. If you really had a psychological episode, I mean, maybe they would bring you home for that. But we have a pretty extensive suite of medical equipment on the space station, including, psychiatric drugs. You could treat somebody if they really just, like President Obama said, freaked out.
Okay, we have a question all the way back up here.
Thank you for a great talk. Just want to get your perspective and thoughts on extraterrestrials, since you've gone to space, and the commercialization of human travel to outer space, and when's Mars?
Okay, so it's 3 questions.
Yeah, perfect. Might as well.
All right. Hopefully I can remember them all. So aliens, there's a lot of space out there. Maybe there's aliens out there. I don't know. There's a lot of stars in the universe. When I was in the Navy, I visited Area 51, and there are no aliens there, unfortunately. It's because we moved them all to Area 52. Please don't tweet that. But I want the Men in Black showing up at my house. I do think there's probably intelligent life out there. I just don't think they kind of stopped visiting once everyone got a camera in their pocket. Because we'd have pictures of them, right? And then why would they always just visit Roswell, New Mexico? I never understood that.
Thank you for your time, for both of you. Very interested in the twins, the identical DNA, the same upbringing, so the same environment. Has there been any conclusions, or has there been any ahas that because you were in space, something's different?
So, science is a slow process, and the research NASA does generally is published 3 to 5 years after the experiment is over. So there's not a whole lot of publications. There's actually something that came out today, but because my iPhone's broke, I couldn't see what it was. But it was something about DNA, with this twin study, how DNA expression. I need to get on my iPad and read it. But there was this experiment with telomeres, that the telomeres are things in our chromosomes. It's like the ends, and as we get older, they get like shorter or more frayed. So they're an indication of like physically how old we are. And the hypothesis was me in space, radiation, harsh environment. My telomeres would get worse, shorter compared to my brother. But what they saw was the exact opposite. And when you do an experiment, the result is the exact opposite of what you thought it would be. That's a big surprise. And, there's probably things we can learn. I don't think it's going to be a fountain of youth that has gotten better. They actually thought, after me being in space for a long time, maybe when we got to be older, like, 60, 70, I would look like I'm 80 and Mark would look like his current age or younger. And I think if that happened, really what happened was my brother got Botox. Seems like his kind of thing to do.
I thought he was going to say I got better looking.
I think that was probably time for our last question, because we don't want to keep you guys here too late. And first thing, I want to say a few final words, but I really want to thank my crewmate. He's a national hero. The final thought I would like to leave you with is when I was leaving the space station for the last time, and keep in mind, this is a space station I spent 500 days of my life on. And I was looking out the window of the Soyuz and looking at the parts that I could actually see. And I'm thinking about how we built this thing, 1 million pounds, size of a football field. We built this in low Earth orbit while flying around the Earth at 17,500 miles an hour in a vacuum, in extremes of temperatures of plus or minus 270 degrees, built by this international partnership of 15 different countries, different languages, different cultures, different engineering standards in some cases, connecting these modules together, some of which had never touched each other before on Earth. Now this space station is the hardest thing we've ever done. And if we can do this, we can do anything. If we want to go to Mars, we can go to Mars. If we want to cure cancer, put the resources behind it, we can do that. If we want to fix our problems with the environment, challenges in your lives. After spending a year in space, I was absolutely inspired that if we can dream it, we can do it. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you.
This was actually way better than I expected. Having two astronauts, bantering, remembering their missions and telling us the very human stories about their time in space is fantastic. We have one more, the fourth session of our great conversations. It's going to be December the 4th. Dr. Julius, the Gardner Award winner.